Alright, so what are 5 reasons a retic might want to bite you? Well, let's first preface this video by saying retics are not bloodthirsty monsters looking to do harm to people. That's just not their natural temperament. They, for the most part, are creatures that live in isolation and want to be left alone. So the first reason a retic is going to want to bite you is defensive behavior. It's scared of you. It wants to be left alone, and it's letting you know, hey, just leave me alone and we won't have any issues. Now, this behavior is typically not going to be seen in captive born and raised animals that have been well socialized, like this girl or my other snakes. This kind of behavior is more typical of, say, wild caught animals out in the wild, or animals that haven't been handled from an early age. Sometimes these retics are born in facilities where there's hundreds of retics to be sold, and they don't get sold until a year or two into their development. Then those retics typically aren't handled or interacted with much at all, and they don't get acclimated to human interaction from an early age. Now, those animals aren't totally just irredeemable or just not able to be worked with. If you're a good retic handler and you understand these snakes, you can work with any animal, really. You can win over these animals at any stage, but you really got to know what you're doing at that point in time. It's far easier to take these animals from babies and socialize them from a very early age. But it's not totally unworkable at later stages of the game. So, a defensive animal is an animal that's scared of you because you are a giant mammal and it sees you as a threat, and it's just letting you know, hey boss, just keep your distance. You don't try to reach for me and grab me, and I won't try to bite you. So, reason number 1, I think it's kind of self-explanatory and easy to understand an animal's perspective on that one. Reason number 2, and this is the one we have to focus on most as keepers, is the feeding response. Snakes and retics are ambush predators, which means in the wild they sit in one spot for hours and hours on end, waiting for a prey item to come by so they can snatch it and eat it. Now, that takes an unbelievable amount of patience and focus to remain poised and ready to spring out like a trap at the first sign of something moving in front of you. This means these animals kind of enter into like a trance-like state where they're just single-pointed focus of mind on snatching the very first warm-blooded signal that crosses their path. In captivity, what that means is when your snake is sitting in its cage, it basically enters this trance state of mind and is in that same mode that it would have to go into the wild in order to feed and fend for itself. So as a keeper, when you come in to interact with your animal, you have to be aware of this mindset that the snake may be in at that time. So when you first open your cage, you have to anticipate that this snake is in a almost hypnotic-like trance, waiting just like a steel trap to snatch up the first sign of something warm-blooded that moves by its face. So what do? We take an instrument, usually a snake hook or any kind of blunt object. I use a stick. We kind of get the snake's attention by rubbing it on the face or on the head, breaking it of this trance-like state, making the snake's brain switch into a different kind of mode to say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Something just rubbed my face, which is the snake's most vulnerable part of its body, and it automatically has to take account of something rubbing its face and be like, wait, I have to protect myself, or I have to switch my mode of thinking and be aware of what's going on here. So basically, you're just snapping them out of that trance-like state and waking them back up to the world around them, to more of an investigative, curious mode of what's going on around them in their environment. They're no longer in that ambush, ready to pounce at a moment's notice state of mind. So that's reason number 2. Reason number 3 is territorial hormonal males during breeding season. Now, most of the time, your male retic is probably going to be well-behaved and on a chilled out, non-hormone raged basis. But during breeding season, they become quite territorial and are looking to basically go to battle with other males. And they can be quite combative and aggressive during these periods. Now, this isn't all males in captivity. Some males, this affects more than others. You actually hear about it less and less now. It seems less common to have a highly aggressive, combative male. It seems to be exacerbated by keeping multiple retics. If you have multiple males in your collection, they can smell each other. That kind of fuels the fire. Or if you have a female that's, ready to be bred, they smell that can trigger them. But yeah, basically males but could potentially be looking for combat during those periods of time. And there are signs your male will become quite restless. He'll start doing what's called arching and rubbing his body all over. If he's in his enclosure, you'll see him rubbing his body up against the sides of the walls, maybe even the roof of his enclosure. Oh, look at that yawn. What a beautiful girl. She's in shed right now. She's probably going to shed in the next day or two, actually. But yeah, males will become quite restless, start arching all over the place. Some males are more intense with this than others. My guy just becomes restless and starts crawling all over the place. He doesn't really arch all too much. But that's typically signs that he's very hormonal and entering his breeding phase of the year. So during those times, you want to take extra caution. Proceed with caution when handling. Some males, if they're very well socialized, they'll become hormonal and very frisky, but they won't actually try to do you harm and bite you. Other males will be ready for blood. So you just have to be aware of that and know if you're working with a hormonal male to take extreme extra precaution. Because a bite from a male in breeding mode are probably the kind of bites that end up in the most serious consequences. They're the most injury-inducing bites you could probably receive from a retic. Of course, anytime a retic bites you, the injury can be quite severe, but male retics in breeding mode are looking to inflict as much damage as possible. So that's probably the biggest, feeding response and that are probably the biggest concerns to look out for. Obviously, in a feeding response, the animal is going to bite and try to constrict you, and that can also be a very detrimental situation. The next reason is Probably one you're not going to encounter, and that's a pregnant female sitting on her eggs. Of course, mothers in nature are quite protective. We all know the description of don't mess with the mama bear. Well, you don't mess with the mama retic sitting on eggs either. They can be quite defensive, and I think that one's pretty explanatory. You're not going to accidentally stumble into that situation, so we'll move on to the next reason, which is snakes cannot communicate with you verbally. So you're not going to know if your snake has an upset stomach or a headache or a pulled muscle in its back and it's not feeling that great and doesn't want to be messed with. If your snake's in pain and can't tell you and you go to pull it out, you could get a response that results in a bite. Usually they give you warnings. They'll huff and puff and buck you off of them. They're not really looking to jump to level 10 and bite you. They'll give you a few subtle warnings, but maybe wag their tail. A snake that is in pain or sick and can't communicate that with you and doesn't want to be bothered can resort to striking. So keep that in mind as well. Other than that, your snake isn't really going to just randomly look to bite you. These are fairly peaceful creatures. They're quiet. They try to remain out of sight, out of mind for the most part. They don't want attention. They're not looking to bring themselves unwanted attention. For the most part, these snakes just want to hide away. They don't really want to interact with you all that much, although retics are, of all the snakes, they're probably the most curious and investigative, but even them, that comes with a limit, Really, snakes just want to be stashed away, camouflaged, hidden, remain unnoticed, unseen, undetected. Pretty much a life mainly of solitude, with little interactions here and there. These animals aren't looking to do you much harm, just out of malicious intent. That's not their nature. Really, that's not the nature of animals in general, except for specific instances of, hardwired behavior over thousands of years for, like I was saying, with the males in breeding mode. It's just part of the nature of a snake, of what they have to do to compete and breed. So that behavior is hardwired into males to more or less a degree. Some males it affects more than others. Oh, another yawn. Oh, good job, kid. Anyways, that's just a little kind of retic psychology I wanted to share with some of the viewers out there that might not really understand why anybody would want to work with these animals or keep them, or they don't really understand the nature of a snake or a retic. It's just a little food for thought. Alright, that's going to be about it for this video. I might have left out a reason or two. There could be other factors, but for the most part, those are the main ones. Alright, we'll see you later. God bless.